Hello listeners, Jordan here. I just want to let you know that you can listen to Nighttime early and ad-free on Amazon Music. Include it with Prime.
Welcome to UFOs Above Canada, a nighttime podcast series exploring the people, the events, and the concepts that surround the Canadian UFO experience.
Hello listeners, and welcome to the next installment in Nighttime's UFOs Above Canada series. In tonight's episode, I'll again be joined by celebrated Canadian UFO writer and researcher Chris Rutkowski, and we got a lot to talk about. As it turns out, Chris recently digitized and released a literal treasure trove of Canadian government documents relating to UFO reports. And there are some real gems in there. In addition to that, Chris and I also have a tremendous amount of UFO reports that have been submitted to me by listeners of Nighttime over the last week or so. And in this episode, Chris and I are going to try to unpack all of it. So yeah, we got a lot to discuss. So let's just get right to it. Chris Rutkowski, you've been a very busy guy this past week. Busy to the tune of, 600 pages of documents that you've shared?
Yeah, there's a whole whack. I think that's the technical term, actually. It's a whole whack.
Oh, yeah, that's a measurement of documents.
Yeah, right? Archivists use that, of newly digitized Canadian government documents on UFOs. And they come from the 90s, specifically 1992, 94, and 95, having issues with some of the other ones. But I thought, well, let's make these available anyways. So one of the preeminent UFO researchers, Isaac Coy, has uploaded them. He has a deal with the Archive for UFOnets in Sweden, and they're all on their website. So each one is there separately. And then I think he's also made them as a composite. So one giant PDF if you want them all at the same time.
Wow.
But yeah, these are NRC reports, National Research Council of Canada reports from those years. And it's what civilians have reported. There's some military reports in there. There's pilots reports in there. These are their actual documents. You hear a lot about, reports from the United States Navy and the Nimitz and the UAP task force and this new organized office and whatever. Oh, we've got lots of reports. You never see any of the reports. Mm-hmm. These are actual reports. These are actual UFO reports from the 90s. And you can actually see what was actually reported throughout that time.
Yeah, very cool to get a look at. We'll get into some of those reports in a bit, but before we do, other than your work getting these documents together and sharing them as you just explained, what goes on in the week, or I guess we spoke last, I think 2 or 3 weeks ago. What goes on in 2 or 3 weeks for Canada's UFO guy? What have you been up to other than this?
Well, I mean, every day I get inquiries from people who've seen things. The past week, there are quite a lot of UFO reports that came through you or directly to me. I have a number of things that are coming up. My book launch, I'm preparing for that. Mm-hmm. I'm actually giving a public presentation here in Manitoba at a provincial park at a campground coming up the next weekend. And so I have to prepare a little bit for that. So there's stuff happening.
Well, the presentation at a campground, will that be at night, or will this be a daytime thing?
No, it's at night. After sun goes down, 9:00, I'm going to be giving a presentation about some of the UFOs that have been seen in and around that particular area. This is in a place called the White Shell Provincial Park in Manitoba.
Okay.
That there's a fair amount of interest in this, and what a perfect time. I'll probably do a little bit of pointing out some planets and some stars in the sky too, throw some astronomy in just for good measure.
Yeah, or maybe you'll get lucky and you'll have like a Starlink pass as that's happening. Because I imagine in like a remote area of Manitoba, you get a great look at the sky out there.
Yeah, absolutely. There's some areas of Manitoba that are very well suited to dark sky sites. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just last week. I was in Prince Edward Island which are probably not unlike Manitoba. There's no major cities near where I was staying, so it's like I'm just not used to seeing the sky that clearly because in Halifax, when I go outside and look at the sky, it's just this like, mustard looking blankness from,
Glow, yeah.
yeah, so you can't really see constellations and stars other than maybe the North Star. But when I was in Prince Edward Island, it was just so amazing to look up and just see everything. And luckily, while I was there, there was several low passes of the Starlink. They must have just launched some new satellites or whatever. So it was I got some really amazing views of that with my kids,
Yeah,
which
I
was
think
great.
there was a launch on Friday or Saturday, the 28th, something like the 27th, I think, was
Okay.
another the most recent launch.
Um, Well, cool stuff. I wish you the best with that. That sounds. If I was in Manitoba, I would definitely be trying to get in on that.
Mhm.
Now let's get into some of these reports. So these documents that you've been sharing, you shared with me, you shared them all across the net. Give me an idea again of where they came from.
These are from my own files. As you know, I've donated thousands of my own UFO files and documents over the years, and to the University of Manitoba archives. And because of the pandemic and all sorts of other stuff, it's slow going to digitize them. The idea is to make them available. So I've actually gone into archives and have actually digitized wax myself. Sat there and spent some time doing that, several hours at a time doing it, and then converted them into readable formats, and then uploaded them to Isaac, who then threw them up on this site. And I think the people are going to be mirroring them all over the place. And
Mm.
it's an interesting collection of 92, 94, and 95. So
Yeah.
these are, and most people think, oh, well, hasn't Canada already done that? Well, Canada did. The National Research Council files were digitized up until about 1982. And after that point, they just never got around to it. And there are no plans of the Library and Archives Canada to digitize more.
Hmm.
So we're sort of dependent on other files and other ways of doing it. Of course, you can go to Ottawa and take a look at them yourself in paper copy, but in terms of digital versions, we're sort of stuck. So I took my own copies of some of these, and this is what I've digitized.
Interesting. Now it's a tremendous amount of documents. I've had a chance to go through them, and you see all sorts of things. Mainly, the ones that caught my attention were the UFO reports and the descriptions of what the people saw and whatnot. But where did this how did this come out? Is this something that people would have received through FOIPOP requests or going to the government and just getting copies and scanning them? Like how did all of these documents now begin to surface?
Well, this batch um, surfaced because, I mean, I went down to the National Research Council many times, to the Library and Archives Canada. And, National Research Council of Canada was the investigating body of UFOs
Mm-hmm.
up until 1995. And the RCMP would investigate on their behalf and send back then the teletypes and other paper copies to the National Research Council for a given year. And at the end of the year, that particular year's worth of paper and documents were bundled up, sent to Library and Archives Canada, where they were redacted, and by that I mean like the names and phone
Mm-hmm.
numbers and addresses of the witnesses were taken off, and then put in the Library and Archives catalog, Library and Archives um, stacks, I guess, the files, and made available to anybody who wanted them. And then you could, if you wanted to, file some access to information request for some of these, and you could get some of these. I know some people have done that. I used to do that quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
So I got them either myself from being in Ottawa or through some access to information requests.
Interesting. I just have one of the reports in front of me here, and you mentioned how the reports have been redacted to remove things like names and phone numbers. It drives me nuts because I really want to contact this person. I'm going to read you a. This is a report that was received by the by the RCMP on the 9th of January 92. So, redacted,
Yeah.
reported to the Gander International Airport Weather Office that she had seen a dark object in the sky near Wesleyville, Newfoundland on January 2nd, 1992 at 4:30 p.m. for about 6 minutes. The same was witnessed by 6 other persons, as recorded below. The sky was fairly clear, and CN reports object appeared to have protrusion from the bottom. There were no visible movements. And the CN, I'm guessing CN is like the person who reported it,
Yeah.
believes the same object was also seen previously, but as a bright object in the darker night sky. The altitude was unknown. And then it goes on to explain, and now here's the part I really dig. The name, which was redacted, lives in Wesleyville, Newfoundland, and her phone number is, and there's the next redaction. She's been reporting these sightings to the Gander International Airport office at, and it gives their phone number. The redacted name further advised that attempts had been made to videotape the object. However, due to the temperature change outdoors, the lens of their video camera had clouded over.
Clogged over. Yeah.
But when I read that, I'm just like, this stuff is amazing. I would love to talk to this person.
Yeah. 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 And that's just, one out of, 400 pages of the documents that are in these files. And, these are things reported to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. So these are actual UFO files recorded by government officials. And, when you hear about, some stories or claims that, there's lots of people seeing UFOs and we're going to get these documents someday and whatever. Well, we have these documents here in Canada.
It's just a matter of someone take it, like, and I guess that's the need for, and the importance of like an archivist. The idea like to collect it all, put it together in a spot that it's easily accessible for the public, but also so that it's organized and curated, so that you don't need to be like, I'm going to spend the next 8 hours going through 800 pages of this stuff.
Yeah, and the point is also, these are just the reports filed with the National Research Council of Canada. There's more cases, obviously. I mean, this was already during the period when I was doing the Canadian UFO survey, and there's lots of hundreds of other cases that have been investigated by researchers from one end of the country to the other. And those are awaiting digitization. So this is just a fraction of what is available out there in the cases that have been reported over the years.
As I went through the documents, most of what I viewed and read through is reports being made, but I haven't seen anything or come across anything that appears that investigations were done. You've gone through these documents in much greater detail than I have. Did you see anything in there that stood out as the government or the NRC or whoever taking that next step and actually trying to figure out what's being reported to them?
Of the organizations, the RCMP, the Mounties, did more investigations than anybody else, because that was their thing, right? They in fact, I remember one RCMP officer said that they treat the UFOs as a criminal investigation, just not because it's something illegal, but because that's the process that they would take. Interviewing the witness's family, going out to the site, taking samples if there are any samples and whatever, and then writing reports and that type of thing. So they did actual investigations. And I would say out of that, the batches but in the 90s, I saw very few in-depth investigations. Now, there were some, there's absolutely were some, but by the time that we got into the 90s, the National Research Council of Canada was really getting out of the UFO business. And I've said that a couple of times, but they were really not that interested in engaging with the public as much anymore. They're looking for excuses to really to not do very much unless something was really spectacular. They didn't do very much. For example, in the case that you just talked about, I doubt that that an RCMP officer did much beyond taking this woman's report, and I don't think that there's a lot of investigation at that point. But there are cases in this batch, and when people take a look at it, there were some cases that amounted to several pages of investigation, interrogation of the witnesses in some great detail. So
Hmm.
I'd say that a very small amount were well investigated, but that's more than that we have for anything from the United States during that particular period.
Hmm.
And it just shows that the amount of data out there is still quite significant. By the 90s, most of the investigation was being done by civilian UFO investigators, and a lot of those were well investigated.
Just speaking of the extent of kind of the investigation that you see in some of these reports, there's one other one that really stood out to me as what is now, I guess, competing with Shag Harbor for my favorite Canadian UFO sighting.
Oh, okay.
And this one is actually, I only learned about this through your documents, the documents that were published. This is a UFO sighting from the 6th of March, 1992. And this is one of the ones that there was I wouldn't say they investigated, but they at least took steps to interrogate or interview the multiple witnesses. And we have a good summary of the statements of everybody involved, but I'll just read you the basics of it. This one's wild. So again, this is March 6, 92. And this is notes by the NRC Meteor Center headquarters. Do you know what the NRC Meteor Center would be?
Well, within the National Research Council, there was a place called the Hertzberg Institute of Astrophysics. And within that, there were some astronomers who were experts in meteors and meteoritics.
Okay.
And they were the ones who were interested in the UFOs. That's where it comes from.
Okay, so it's this office that shares this report. So it reads, the complainant reported that he saw very light bluish colored lights in the trees moving around them. Then he saw a tall, approximately 8-foot tall, hairy monster standing atop a large snow pile. This monster then chased the complainant and his friends into town from the bush/park area that they were originally in. This occurred on March 6, 92 in Deerwood Park, Thompson, Manitoba at approximately 22:40. Complaint was received at 2300 hours. The subject was approximately 8 feet tall, hairy, bony on the upper body, but with big legs and feet. There was only one, and he was walking on the ground. The sky was clear, but it was dark. The witnesses are, and then they list the witnesses, but they're redacted. The children had been to the movies, so I'm now learning by this statement that the redacted names are likely children that reported this. So it says, the children had been to the movies. They saw Stop or My Mother Will Shoot, and had been out later than they were supposed to have been. They may have fabricated the story to stay out of trouble. Also, the children did tell police that they followed 4 to 6 drunken males into the park. One of the males stopped and turned, telling the children to be careful. In any case, police feel that the children's story is part imagination and part fabrication. Police, however, are still investigating this occurrence. And then that goes on with several pages of the statements of each of the children involved in this.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I think that's amazing because it's the idea that like you're out too late with your buddies and you need to come up with a story. And the story is like a UFO. There's this 8-foot tall alien.
Yeah.
There was a drunk man who was like, "Be careful." It sounds like it's too crazy to be true. To be
is.
Made up. It's true.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. Yeah. And
I believe every word of it.
Yeah. And the statements from like you say, the statements from the kids are there. The RCMP report goes on for a number of pages. And there's one that was investigated fairly in depth, so it's there.
Well, I guess an investigation or a report or a complaint like that, I would love to be like a fly on the wall in that room as they're deciding which route to take that. But the fact that we have access to that stuff is pretty amazing. People who enjoy like UFO reports and UFO stories, like that is the kind of stuff that I look for. I love that sort of thing.
Yeah, and again, this is not something that you're just reading in a book or a UFO fanzine. This is an actual police report. And you have to think, wow, this is actually was actually taken to at least some extent seriously.
Mm-hmm. With the release of this many Canadian documents from all across the country, has there been much interest? Like you would be the one who'd be hearing from people. What are people thinking about this, or has there been much of a reaction?
As a matter of fact, I've heard very little. I know people have noted it on Twitter and on Facebook. And, there's been maybe a handful of people who said, oh, yeah, this is kind of interesting, which is really, to me, very curious because you think with all the fascination going around now about, the UAP task force and the need for disclosure, and we're really close to disclosure, and there's going to be whistleblowers coming forward with all sorts of good stuff any minute now, and there's going to be a report released by the Pentagon, any minute now, and yet, you dump, hundreds of official documents of UFO investigations from Canada, and nobody takes any interest whatsoever. So, I don't know. It's a little puzzling.
Yeah, certainly. I want to take a bit of a sidestep here. If you recall from the last time we talked, something we discussed was a concert in, I believe it was in Nova Scotia, maybe it was in New Brunswick, that involved Ashley McIsaac and his guitar player performing a song that included the line "The aliens are nice." You remember this?
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
A listener of our show sent a voice memo giving their thoughts on that segment of that discussion. I want to play it for you.
This is Beth calling from Manitoba, a longtime listener and fan. And I'm calling about a recent story which may have given me a spiritual awakening. I'm wondering if I'm not the only one here going through this, because all I can hear in the back of my head when I go to sleep at night is, "The aliens are nice, the aliens are nice." Anyway, I just thought, I don't go to church anymore, but if there was the closest thing to going to church, it might be that, and I might go back. Thanks for sharing this wonderful little concert. I'm not sure who sang it or what that venue was, but it was a sweet little ditty, and just wanted to say thanks and keep doing what you're doing. You guys are awesome. Have a good one.
So that's quite the reaction, right?
Yeah, that's really good. That's good. That's quite significant.
And that song is actually, I've learned that it is actually a recorded song that you can hear on Spotify. So when I publish the podcast version of this episode, I'm going to include a link in the episode description for people who want to hear the actual recording. It is a good song.
Yeah, I mean, you only have to think about "I'm a Stranger Here" on this place called Earth by who was that? Was that Five-Man Electrical Band? I can't remember now.
Okay, I know the tune. I would never be able to pull out the artist's name though. You're good.
Yeah.
I got some reports for us. I'm going to start with one that was sent to us as a voice memo, and then I have a few written reports. But we got a lot. I think since we did our recording, 2 weeks ago, maybe that kind of kicked the hornet's nest a bit and encouraged some people to write in and send voice memos. Or maybe it's just been a really busy 2 weeks in Canada's skies, because I've got a lot of reports here. The first two both come from the evening of August 20th. This is Victoria, BC.
Hi, Jordan. My name is Claire, and I live in Victoria, British Columbia. Last night, August 20th, 2022, at around 9:45 p.m., I saw something unusual in the sky. I'm a stargazer, and I'm always looking up. I have seen planets, shooting stars, satellites, the space station, various constellations all the time, and I've even seen Starlink, so I know what all of those things look like. But last night, as I was looking up, I began to see something kind of very strange in the sky. It started out as kind of a long, thin, very kind of wispy, cloud-like thing. And my first thought was that it was the trail of a plane. But I thought, that's odd because it is at night, and it seems to be luminescent in a way. But as I watched it, it suddenly began to morph into something different. it began to take a sharper focus and turn into a line of maybe 50 to 80 bright, burning white lights, traveling very quickly all together in a southeasterly direction in the sky. These objects, as I said, were all white. They were glowing white and bright and bigger and brighter than all of the other stars in the sky. They stayed together in a line, and the distance between each of the bright lights varied slightly, and each of those bright lights was a little bit of a different size. And as I said, it was quite a long string of them. They took up, probably a fifth of the whole skyline that I could see. It turned out that a neighbor was walking in front of me, and I shouted at him to look up as well, and he did. And he had no explanation for what it was. It traveled, as I said, very quickly all together, and just as it had come into focus, it slowly faded out of focus and returned again into this kind of just luminescent line that suddenly dispersed. Now, I am just wondering if this was the Pleiades meteor. I thought I've seen meteors before, but this was just so different. I would love to find out if it was. Thanks again, and I enjoyed the show. Bye.
My first reaction to hearing that is at the beginning she lists some things that she has seen before that she believes she could recognize, and one of them was Starlink. Mm-hmm. When I hear her description, to me it very much sounds like this could have been a Starlink sighting.
Absolutely. In fact, I'm guessing that's exactly it. She talked about she thought 50 to 80. Well, there were about 50 Starlinks sent up on the night of August 19th. And this was on the August 20th.
Yeah.
So, that's very, very likely that that's what that was. Then there was the most recent launch was August the 28th. So today, very early. So they would be, seen, possibly tonight. I'd have to take a check. I don't know them off the top of my head. But the 19th fits perfectly, and August the 28th fits perfectly too.
Yeah, her sighting was the 20th, but the way it would work, like when they launched the satellites for Starlink, like they'd be very visible the 19th, a little less on the 20th, a little less on the 21st, until they're too high into orbit.
Until they spread out. Yeah, and then they dim and so forth. Yeah.
Yeah. But the way she described it reminds me a lot of what I've seen. It's like with Starlink, you can find out online like when it's visible from where you are. So I knew, like when I was traveling in PEI, I knew when Starlink was coming, and let's say if it was going to be 8:54 or something, I'm looking around at the sky at that point trying to get a glimpse of it, and it's not like an airplane flying over you. It's like I'm kind of looking at it and I see lights and I'm like, is that it? And then it slowly comes into focus, and then it's right above me, fills the sky, a whole bunch of white dots in a perfect line, and it very quickly passes. Like it's going at a pretty good speed.
It goes pretty quickly, and covering about a fifth of the sky. Sounds like this one was spread out by a little bit by that time. Sometimes you can catch them very shortly after release in space, and they're all sort of scrunched in together, and they look like a long kind of cigar in the sky. The best description, and this comes from some of the reports we've got recently, was that somebody described it as a caterpillar with lights on its legs.
I like that.
And I thought, oh, that's really good. That's a good way of describing it too.
Yeah. I got another voice report from the same evening, August 20th. Let's see if this is different. This is Lake Ontario.
My kids and I were at Lake Ontario. We were looking north. We were trying to see the northern lights. And about 9:45, this object just appeared over Lake Ontario. It was very long and narrow, and it was lit up. and it was coming south towards like the St. Catharines area, and it was moving at quite a quick pace. And as it got, I want to say towards the east, but towards like St. Catharines, it just vanished. The lights just went out over top of the lake, and yeah, we kind of collected our dogs and left as quickly as possible. And we do have a video of it. There's a lot of swearing. We were a little bit startled, but it was definitely nothing I've ever seen in my life.
The same evening, I think her description doesn't go in enough detail about, they were in a line, but I'm again leaning towards Starlink being responsible.
Yeah, and that time is exactly when people were seeing it right across the country. So that does work. And I have to note that it's not just Starlink that you can, punch in and try find, the time that it's going over. There's a site called Heavens Above, and it includes not just the stars and planets that are visible at the time, but all the satellites that are visible at that time. And you can go specifically down to the brightest ones, and you can actually, find the International Space Station, or a Russian Cosmos that's passing overhead, or something else. And you can go with this guide from this site and go out and actually see it. So there's many ways of seeing it. Sometimes when people see lights moving by themselves in the sky that sort of wink out, and then you see another one moving in a different direction, all that, it's probably because there's a satellite that's going into Earth's shadow and one's coming out of Earth's shadow and things like that. So there are ways of trying to ascertain some of what you're seeing.
Mm-hmm. There always seems to be something that pops up that is there's just like a rash of this specific thing being mistaken for UFOs. Like right now, it's clearly Starlink is like so many reports can be attributed to Starlink. For a while, it was like drones or Chinese lanterns. Like there's always something, and it just Starlink really came out of nowhere. At least for me, with the reports that I get through my website. So many of them now I read, and I'm like, that's probably Starlink. That it's at the point where I almost need to need to like rule out Starlink before I even consider anything else, where chances are that's where it goes.
Yeah, and rather than assume that something is a spaceship or truly mysterious, think about the possibilities of what these things are that you're seeing first. Am I looking at a satellite? Am I looking at Starlink? Does that move like a drone? Is that a high flying aircraft? That type of thing. Mm-hmm. And once you've eliminated all of that, then you can move towards the UFO explanation.
And that's what our next report is going to do. This next one, I am sure it is not Starlink, okay. And it is a daytime sighting. This is from Joanne. This is a sighting on August 24th. I believe this is Yorkton, Saskatchewan is where this came from.
Okay.
All right, so it's at 4 p.m. Eastern. So we saw a cigar-shaped craft that was tan in color. My 86-year-old mother saw it in the sky as we were waiting to make a left-hand turn onto Van Horn Avenue. She asked me what it was, and I looked and answered, I think it's a plane. My mom said, it doesn't look like a plane to me. And I looked again and said to my mother, I think it's actually descending. I could not see the wings or tail and figured maybe this was why I couldn't see them, because it may have been descending. I also noted that there was no trail behind it, but I know that's not that's not uncommon with planes, so I didn't think too much about that at the time. The traffic light turned green, and I proceeded to make my turn and didn't think about it again until later that night when I was telling my husband about what we saw. It was during that talk with my husband that I realized that even if the plane was descending, it might have been on a slight angle away from me, that I would have still been able to see the tail or at least one of the wings. And that's when the light went on, and I realized that what I saw was a UFO, not a plane. I also noted that I didn't remember seeing it moving because I was too busy looking for wings and the tail. The next day I was out driving, and I saw another craft, which was a plane, and it was actually tilted a slight bit, and I could clearly see the wings and tail. So I know what I saw on Wednesday was a UFO.
Okay.
But what would be a tan object? Tan is an
A
odd color
tan object.
that would be visible in a daytime sky. I think the tan is unique because it's, you see like those foil balloons and stuff, but generally they reflect either as a bright light or as a metallic object. But tan seems like a unique color to be spotted.
Yeah, tan is very strange. The fact that she said it wasn't moving and it was a long like, sort of cigar object. I mean, one thing that comes to mind is that a jet contrail itself, depending on whether it's reflecting sunlight or not, might appear kind of a yellowish brown hanging in the sky. Um, and she doesn't say exactly how long she watched it for because these things can hang in the sky for many minutes
This
and
seemed
appear
very quick though, because she described she sees it at the light, and then the light changes and she doesn't see
and
it.
and she doesn't see it. Yeah, I don't know what that might be. One thing to note about Yorkton is there's actually a balloon launch. Environment Canada launches balloons from an area near Yorkton, but this doesn't sound like a balloon. So,
Mhm.
I think we can probably rule that one out.
Okay. Let's move over to Gravenhurst, Ontario. This is August 22nd. Frances tells us that at about 11 p.m., she was swimming in Lake Muskoka looking at the Big Dipper. I initially thought I saw a shooting star coming from the bottom of the Dipper, but it soon became clear that we were seeing something completely different. As it came towards us, we saw that it was shaped like a giant caterpillar. It had
Hmm.
many lights, and we guessed it to be approximately 5 foot. We guessed it to be approximately 5,000 feet up and about the length of 7 car trains. At its front was a pale red light, and it looked like it was spitting white light from it. So this is the one you referenced earlier, where a giant caterpillar of light would certainly give the impression of possibly Starlink, because it's
Hmm.
a straight line. But I like to think that a caterpillar, like everything is kind of moving around. So
Yeah, it could be.
I'm
Now
picturing
what
these
was the
lights all just bobbing around.
yeah, what was the date of that one though?
That was the 22nd of August.
22nd
So
of
that would have
August.
been about 3 or 4 days after if they were launched on the 19th. They
Yeah.
they wouldn't be very bright by the 22nd, I wouldn't think.
No, no, that's true. So not sure about that. Have to think about that. But yeah, it doesn't sound like it could be Starlink, but it's possible. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes depending on the cluster and the orbit, I don't know.
Mm-hmm. I do like that they were able to give an approximation of it being about 5,000 feet high. I just wonder
Yeah,
where they come up with that. I would have no idea how high
yeah,
up 5,000 feet is.
yeah. We're actually our ability to judge distance and altitude of an object in the night sky is pretty pathetic.
I
Uh,
couldn't gauge it on the ground.
yeah, exactly.
Um, let's go to Ajax. Now this should be interesting because this is August 19th. So this is
Okay,
the day Starlink was launched.
okay.
This is at 9:43 p.m.
Hmm.
Um, so here we go. This is what Andrea says. Where I live has a great view of sunrise and sunsets over Lake Ontario. On the evening of Friday, August 19th, at approximately 9:43 p.m., I was
Hmm.
enjoying the evening with my neighbor in my building. It was a dark evening. There was no clouds in the sky, just the moon glistening over the lake. We did notice the frequency of planes in the far distance as some lights appeared closer and further away. I happened to be looking up and noticed a large blimp-shaped object appear. I immediately said to her, "Do you see that?" And she replied, "Yes." We both stood up and stared. After a few seconds, she reached for her phone to capture it, and I said, "It's too dark." I looked down to try also, but by the time we both looked back up to the sky, it was gone. The hairs on my body stood up. A chill came over me, and we both sat there trying to come to grips with what we witnessed. The object, when compared to a plane, was at least 1,000 times the size of the plane, if not more. The blimp did not have any lights surrounding it, but what the blimp did not have any lights surrounding it, but what appeared to be an aura or some type of gray-white gas that was illuminated enough for us to distinctively see its formation, and followed it as it traveled slowly northeast for approximately 15 to 20 seconds. So this one doesn't strike me as Starlink at all, because what they're seeing is not an illuminated object, it's rather a dark object. And if you didn't get kind of the narrative there, one friend tried to take a picture of it, and the picture didn't come out. So Andrea, who's reporting that, she kind of bends over to get her camera, and it's at this point that the thing fades out of existence. But what they saw, rather than like a string of lights or something, was like a dark body in the sky that seemed to be illuminated slightly, only due to the fact that there was something behind it that was brightening it up.
Yeah. Although the time works out for
I know.
Starlink.
And when I saw the time and the date, and I got that report, I'm like, oh, here we go.
But it tells us, that that people will report seeing things and put their own interpretation on it, their own spin on it. And in cases where we definitely know things are Starlink, for example, where people provide photos and videos, their accompanying description is sometimes very, very different. Mm-hmm. Blimp is very common for Starlink. Cigar is very common. String of pearls is very common. And the fact that sometimes you'll see, and I've heard this once or twice before, where people will say that there is a dark object with lights on it. And in the case of Starlink, there is no dark object. There's just the lights, but our minds think that if there's lights in the sky, they must be on something. So we'll interpret it as being an object that it's on. So that's still possible. So yeah, even though the description sounds very fantastic and completely unlike Starlink, the fact that it occurred at exactly when Starlink was in the sky, makes you think, well, maybe that's what it was. But again, this is why ufology is so interesting, and why UFO investigation is a lost art, because it's hard work. You have to go through a lot of hoops.
Yeah, certainly. And it's you're always going by memory, like even time. Like if I saw something, unless I looked down at my phone and saw exactly what time it is, I would have a hard time even giving you an estimate of the time, which for a researcher would make it very difficult to rule in or out certain objects that may be seen or would have been visible at that point in time.
Absolutely. But it does tell you, even the cases where we can say, or we say that these things were Starlink, those are actually very important. And the reason they're important is because when a person reports a UFO and we're able to explain it, that means they actually saw something. There was something in the sky that they reported and described and affected them emotionally or whatever, but they saw something. It was really there. So in the case of something where somebody reports a UFO that is not Starlink and we don't know what it is, we should not throw it out and just say, oh, it's nonsense, a person was making it up, or they were hallucinating or pulling everybody's leg. No, because in most of the cases that we can explain, there really was something there. Mm-hmm. So in the case where we can't explain it, you simply can't just say, oh, it's nothing, there's nothing there. There was something there, most likely.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Now, I know it's early to talk about this, but the UFO survey this year, have you even seen any preliminary data of reports being up or down or one way or the other at this point, or is it too early to tell?
It is early, but I mean, I can say, Starlink is an outlier, because we got, I don't know how many, 20, 30 reports or something like that, which, skews the stats a bit. Up until that point, we received comparatively few UFO reports. It was very interesting. I was on a TV show from England earlier today, and the person before me was another UFO fellow who's saying that in the United States, the story is that there's many more reports, and sightings are way, way up, and reports are way, way up. And I haven't seen the data. I mean, we haven't seen the reports that back that up.
Mm-hmm.
You've heard stories that people are saying that the UFO reports are up, but we can't back that up with data. With the Canadian UFO survey, we actually see the reports, and those numbers are actually down a little bit. But with Starlink numbers, maybe it'll sort of even out that it's be about the same as last year. So it's too early to tell, but nothing, no big increases, that's for sure. But people are consistently still reporting UFOs, and that's, I think, getting data is all. What's really hot these days. This Galileo project that's out of Harvard, and all these scientists are looking for data. Well, this is the data, and this is what science should be looking at.
Hello, listeners. Sorry to pull you to the episode like this, but I want to take a moment and share some production notes and updates with you. First of all, I'm working on my next listener-contributed story episode. This one is going to feature those of you who have had the misfortune of being scammed, either financially or otherwise. So let me use this as a time to call out to you. Did you have a Facebook Marketplace deal go south? A job offer turn into a living hell? Or maybe a deal that seemed too good to be true turned out to be, well, untrue? If so, help me turn your horrible experience into a cautionary tale for other nighttime listeners. You can contribute by sending a short description of what happened to you to nighttimepodcast@gmail.com and make sure to include the word scam in the subject line. I'll get back to you and we can work out the next steps. And just so no one has to ask, yes, you can remain anonymous. Now, with that said, let me remind everyone listening that Nighttime values your comments, your suggestions, and your feedback. In fact, I want to include more of these sorts of things in the show. So if you have something to share related to the show or any stories I've covered, go to nighttimepodcast.com, click on the Contact tab, and send me a voice memo. I'd love to include it in an upcoming episode. And now one last message before we get back to this episode. I want to remind Nighttime listeners, both new and old, that all past episodes of Nighttime and countless hours of bonus content are waiting for you on the premium feed. For only a couple dollars a month, you can get about twice as much Nighttime than the free feed offers. You can get exclusive content, after-show recordings, and various behind-the-scenes stuff by going premium at patreon.com/nighttimepodcast. And not only does a premium feed subscription give you more Nighttime, it also helps fund the creation of the show. So thanks for considering it. Now let's get back to the episode. Just an interesting idea with this year's report, given that Starlink is likely going to come into play to some extent, would be like some kind of visualization of when Starlink would be most visible versus when the reports were received, just to give a sense of how it may affect it. Because I can imagine it kind of being in waves, because they do their launches every month or whatever it is. So there must be some kind of correlation in the data.
I think absolutely. As a matter of fact, the next launch is the night of August 30th for us.
Okay.
So you tack on another 7 hours for them to zip around the side of the Earth where we can see them. So just thinking, we might see it the early morning of August 31st, or have to wait for the following day. So I mean, we can in fact point out that some of these satellites do coincide. There is a fellow who's actually Canadian. I'm trying to remember his name is Terry Molzan or something like that. He's an ardent debunker, and he's written a number of interesting articles in a UFO zine called UFO. Can't remember it now. Can't remember the title. Going blank. Anyways, his theory is that all significant UFO reports have occurred around the time of rocket reentries and satellite reentries and all that sort of stuff, and that they coincide, and that explains everything. Well, I've gone back through the Canadian UFO survey data, and I found cases of significant UFO reports that didn't coincide with a satellite launch,
Mm-hmm.
and found satellite launches that were not actually observed and reported as UFOs. So it's not a consistent thing, but he does raise some interesting questions and issues, and some of them some of these cases do match. So we have to be very careful, and it's a very useful tool to take a look at satellite tracking in terms of UFO reports.
All right. Well, and just one last thing about the survey. When are you publishing it each year? Like when
Well,
would
what
you expect?
happens is we usually wait until February-ish of the following of the calendar year, because it takes a time. For example, people who report UFOs not to you, which is where they should be reporting them, but to things like the National UFO Reporting Center in the States or to MUFON. Sometimes it takes a month or two for people to
Yeah, okay.
actually report them.
So you take a little bit of time to let the stragglers catch up, I guess. So
Yeah,
that
yeah,
makes
and
sense.
then we have to gather, and because we gather reports from all the known sources, UFO websites, and researchers across Canada, and then to actually physically enter them all, which is a very time-consuming thing. You can imagine that typical year we have 700 to 1,000 UFO reports that have to be entered into a database.
Jeez.
That takes time. So, it does take a while. So we usually try to get it out by March, April.
Ah, gotcha.
Sometimes it's delayed until like May or June, but
Yeah.
it'll come.
Yeah. Now, one last question is we've talked a lot about reports coming in and what things may and may not have been, but as in how the data is compiled and used, of course, with your survey. But what we don't talk about a lot is who actually investigates reports.
Mm.
Is that something like there was a time when there was, MUFON and all these kind of civilian groups that would have an interest in their reports, contact people, make calls, and try to, solve these many riddles that pop up. But it seems like largely over the last maybe 5 or 10 years that has really waned, and it seems like it doesn't even happen now.
Yeah, and I've actually um, talked about this a number of times, that UFO investigation is a lost art. It's a lot of work, it's time consuming, and we don't have the resources. Most people interested in UFOs and try to be investigators don't have the resources because, I mean, in the United States, for example, MUFON has chapters in most, if not all, states, sometimes more than one. So, for a person who is a MUFON investigator in Ohio, um, there could be a few dozen people who are MUFON investigators, and Ohio is much smaller than, say, Ontario. And there's only a limited number of UFO investigators in each province in Canada. In fact, some provinces don't have UFO
Hmm.
investigators, so we don't have the resources to actually physically go and investigate. Most UFO investigation is done via the internet.
Hmm.
I think few are done actually with voice over the phone these days, although thankfully some of the people send leave you some voicemails. But to actually investigate is something that's gone the way of the dodo. It's simply not physically possible, and resources are simply not there,
Hmm.
which is a problem. But at the same time, in the case of the Greater Toronto Area, for example, in the GTA, I mean, there are enough investigators that if something is seen around, Scarborough or Peterborough or something like that, there would be somebody who could spend some time investigating. But remember that most UFO uh, sightings do tend to have explanations, whether there's Starlink or satellites or planes or stars or planets or whatever. And so it's not practical for investigators to go out investigating every single case.
Hmm.
If something sounds like a duck, it's probably a duck. So if
Hmm.
somebody reports something that sounds like Starlink, there's no need to go out and investigate and survey the neighborhood and that type of thing. So there are reasons why it's not being done anymore, but at the same time, there are some cases that deserve some further investigation, and I'm convinced that if there are some cases that pop up, regardless of where they are in Canada, there will be some investigations that could be done by people locally in the area, unless they're really out of the way. If something is seen in Cambridge Bay and Nunavut, I have no idea how that would be investigated.
Mm-hmm.
But the good news is that some really good cases will be investigated, and hopefully that there's this push for UAP investigations here in Canada, and I know that some politicians are making some noise in parliamentary committees. They're with the United States and its interest in UAPs. Perhaps there's going to be more of an effort on the part of the Canadian Forces or the RCMP or Transport Canada or NAV Canada to do investigations a little bit more. Maybe there's some level investigation that's already being done. We don't know that, but perhaps there's something being done. And I think the point is that civilian UFO investigators, many of them are fairly well trained, very good observers. Some are former RCMP and military backgrounds. So they would be good resources for the government UFO or UAP investigations here in Canada. So I'm hoping that there will be an increase in the amount and the degree of UFO investigation in Canada.
Yeah, I feel the same, and I think it's really important to have like civilians taking it on as well. Like, because one thing with the whole UFO scene and disclosure, like there's this paradox where I think a lot of people have the belief that the government maybe has more or is doing more than they're publicly stating, and maybe hiding stuff for whatever reason. That's always been kind of an idea in this, but at the same time, people seem to be want the government to be the ones to take on the investigations and ramp up their funding for UFO investigations or whatnot. But I think the idea is kind of a paradox in that if the government has this info and is not coming clean and revealing it, then maybe they're not the people who we should want to investigate, and should be civilians who take on the charge like they have been doing, and since interest in UFOs really started, it's been largely driven by civilians. At least it seems to me.
And you're right, it is an interesting paradox because the point of the whole X-Files theme was don't trust the government because they're hiding everything. And yet people right now are saying, oh, the government's going to disclose exactly what they have. We're going to leave it all up to the government investigations and the UAP task force run by the Pentagon. Well, yeah. But if you can't trust them, why are you trusting them to do that? It makes no sense to me whatsoever.
Yeah, it is strange, but regardless, lots to discuss. We could go on all night, but we won't tonight. We'll wrap this up, but I'm sure it'll be no time from now. Then I'll have a pocket full of reports that I'm going to want to talk to you about. So you'll hear from me soon.
A passel of them.
Exactly. I'm going to go read more of that sighting of the 8-foot-tall beast and the various statements that the children gave the police.
Stay away from Thompson, Manitoba, man. Boy.
All right, Chris. Well, it's been great, buddy. Thanks for joining me again.
Okay, great. Thanks, George.
I want to thank you for joining Chris Rutkowski and I for our discussion. But before we part, I want to give some thanks. A big thanks to Chris for sharing an evening with me and with you, the listeners of Nighttime. A shout out to Monty Datta, who contributes the music for this episode, and a shout out to LJ from Dystopian Simulation, who provides the intro and outro voiceovers. But as usual, the most important thanks of all goes out to every one of you listening, as without your interest and your support, Nighttime would be as pointless as it would be impossible. But with that said, keeping this show alive is and has always been an uphill battle. So if you want to help take a bit of weight off the show's back, the best way to pitch in is by subscribing to the premium feed. And not only does that fund the creation of the show, it gives you many more episodes than you'll find here on the free feed. And on the topic of the premium feed, let me thank the newest subscribers. Robin, Elaine, and Steven, thank you for going premium. And for anyone else interested, you can get the premium feed at patreon.com/nighttimepodcast. And one last thing before we wrap up here. If anyone listening has any story ideas, wants to give feedback on the show, or would like to contribute a voice memo to be aired in an upcoming episode, you can reach me at nighttimepodcast.com/contact. I hope to hear from you. But until then, take care of each other, hug your loved ones tight, and let me know if you see anything weird.
The Nighttime Podcast is written, hosted, and produced by Jordan Bonaparte.